Can you record?
It's recording, should be. Is it not coming up? It's recording.
Okay. So on the count of three, we'll begin. 1, 2, 3. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our presentation this week on policy on religion and beliefs and education. And we're presenting Mary Masterson is here. Say hello, Mary.
Hello, everyone.
And Timothy Murphy from UL. Mary and Tim are from UL.
Hello, everyone.
And I'm Trish Kieran. And we began to work together on a funded NICE research project, the National Institute for the Study of Education. And we were interested in religion and education in Ireland and the EU. We were interested in policy from 2001 to 2020, and we're interested in practice. And it's a really complex, contested, and a big topic, expansive. And we wanted to look at primary and post-primary education. So there were three parts to the research: an overview of the historical dimension of the Irish context, and Mary is very ably going to take us through that. Then an outline of contemporary policy issues in Ireland, and Tim will take us through that. And then I'll look at the EU policy and practice context post 9/11. So our methodology was in phase 1 to do desk-based research, and then we were hoping to do 3 case studies in Germany. Mary was hoping to go there and do her case study. Tim was going to the UK, and I was hoping to go to Belgium, but with COVID, we've had to postpone that case study aspect. And then our third phase was to look at findings and recommendations. Because of COVID again, our timescale is slightly out, and we are at phase 1 doing our desk-based study, and that's what we're presenting today.
So I'm going to talk to you now for a couple of slides about the historical context. So the church's involvement in schooling in the Irish context has a long history. The churches have been involved really from the very beginning, in early Christian period with the monasteries, and later on throughout the state's development from under British rule until independence. The church into modern times has had a significant contribution it has made to education in terms of policy and also staffing of schools and the building of schools as well. So really, I suppose for the church, schooling is seen as an extension of pastoral care. So it's something that's very close to the heart of the church. And at all levels, the church and the different churches in Ireland have sought and have indeed established influence in all levels, from primary to second level onto higher education. So Ireland for 700 to 800 years was really colonised by the British Empire, and earlier on the recognition was there that it was important for our identity. There was a connection between our religious beliefs and our values and how we understood ourselves to be Irish. The British colonial powers also they looked at a policy of assimilation, so that the idea was if they could pass laws like the penal laws that excluded the majority of the faith, that is the Catholic faith in Ireland, that they could get loyalty and they could get better allegiance, and it was a way of getting submission in the people. So there was quite a lot of resistance for the hierarchy in the churches recognised this, and they persisted in seeking to keep faith and to keep religion on the agenda in terms of the education area of society. So we can move on. So there was always a movement from certain sectors to get independence when we were colonised. And as in other colonial settings, the means by which nationalism emerged and engaged in society was based on a desire to achieve independence. And the Catholic Church played an important role in motivating Catholics to resist British rule and to seek their own separate political destiny. So here we have at this stage a very close relationship between politics and religious beliefs. And this church-state connection continues until this day. We can move on. So the faithfulness of Irish Catholics to the religious heritage has historically provided the Church with tremendous institutional power in society. So in the past, the Church has been able to utilise this power to transmit its message effectively from the pulpit and through its control of the schools and administration of social services and influence in social policy to the people. So this has been really important in Ireland, and makes Ireland, I suppose, a very, we would see it as a denominational type of education experiences, because the churches have recognised that really it is important to be involved in education of the citizens. We can move on to the next slide, please. So the foundation, we got independence in 1922. So at that stage, our state, Ireland was divided. So we've got the 6 counties and the 32 counties. So in the south, as we say, the population was predominantly Catholic. So 92% of the population were Catholics, were Roman Catholics. So the government's decisions was heavily influenced by the Catholic clergy. The government was new, the Republic was new, and they relied really closely on the Catholic Church for support as well, and for guidance. How would they forge their own identity separate to an identity that had been under almost attack for centuries? So this was something that the different government leaders, the different Taoiseachs were very keen to work closely with the church. So we see in the new state social policy, for example, was being influenced by Catholic doctrine. So and anti-divorce was passed, and also there was a ban on contraceptives. So Irishness and Catholicism in 1922 was closely associated. So there were really almost 2 sides of the one coin. So you have the church state working together. So the education policy consequently was also influenced by the hierarchy of the church. So there was the ownership and the control of education. We can see that many of the schools were set up actually by different religious orders, teaching orders, and the state had not much money for economic reasons. They couldn't put their scant resources into building all new schools. So they were quite happy, was a convenient symbiotic relationship to work with the state. Curriculum reform and the control of morality was something that the church viewed as important, and they had an influence there on the curriculum in the new state. And I suppose later on, as society became more secular and more diverse, there was debates about maybe parental choice and equality issues. But it's quite interesting that this connection really in the Irish context, that even with the new state, that the state had that close relationship with the church. So we can move on. So in 1937 in the Constitution, Article 42 does acknowledge that the primary and natural educator of the child is the family, and the church was keen to mind almost the rights of the family. So within the family, the belief systems, the value systems should be represented in the curriculum, and that is, I suppose, something that is very important for our education system and continues to be today. So we'll move on. So with the foundation of the new state, there was a movement of a cultural nationalism policy was implemented. So education was seen was not a service which developed almost apart from general society, was embedded in society. So what was happening out in society was also happening. We see it even today in education. So politics and religion have long, had an impact on this development, and education became, in some quarters, a battleground by which different confrontations between the political forces of the church and the state were fought if there was a division, if there wasn't an agreement in terms of certain directions in education. We can see their disputes arising. So here we are now in contemporary Ireland, and in recent years, there has been a rapid rise in secular and pluralist influences here in our society, and these have dramatically, altered many of the historical patterns of our schooling. There are many conflicting views and much debate nowadays and reflection on the role of religion in a publicly funded education system. So there's a lot of questioning of the denominational characteristic of the Irish schooling experience. And we're in a time, I suppose, of great debate, and there are many different voices now in society. So we're living through a very interesting historical period.
Mary's contribution has sketched the peculiarities and the unique trajectory with regard to interrelations between religion, education and the state. And in this next segment, I would like to focus on the policy context in the Irish context, drawing on the background that Mary has sketched. For example, there's ample evidence to suggest that following independence, the churches, both Catholic and Protestant, moved quickly to consolidate their dominant positions in their respective educational provinces. A sociologist, Payon, for example, contends that they succeeded in transforming schools, which might otherwise have been, if not lay, at least neutral in religious matters, into institutions which were directly controlled by the clergy, divided along religious lines, and more committed to catechizing. As a result of these developments, Kieran points out that there is a need for greater appreciation of the perspectives and rights of all citizens, including diverse minority religious groups, as well as humanist, secular, atheist and other non-religious persons. The benefits of doing so for Ireland and for the wider European context has been acknowledged. And in this regard, again, Kieran acknowledges that religious traditions, with their emphasis on shared values, social justice and responsibility, as well as the common good, have something very positive to offer Europe. They constitute, in the words of Professor Jean de Gough, fundamental pillars of society. A question can be posed as to whether or not there is a sufficiently robust policy infrastructure in Ireland to allow for the potential of these benefits to emerge. An initial consideration of the associated policy infrastructure could respond positively to this question. For example, the Department of Education's 1995 White Paper, Charting Our Education Future, highlighted the philosophical principles that were to underpin all future developments in education. It acknowledged that the state was obligated to promote and protect fundamental human and civil rights in accordance with the Irish Constitution, national law, relevant international conventions, including the UN Convention on the rights of the child. Also, the Education Act 1998 underpinned the principles and requirements of a democratic society, which involves promoting respect for the diversity of values, beliefs, traditions, languages, and ways of life in society. Additionally, the Equal Status Act 2005 acknowledges the importance of respect for religious diversity, and that is identified as one of the 9 grounds for inclusion in the mainstream provision of education. One of the challenges is inclusion for all across all these 9 grounds. However, on closer examination, it could be possible for some doubt to be cast on this initial positive consideration. It is acknowledged, for example, by Bates et al., that for policies to be successfully implemented, the people who actually implement them have to have a significant ownership of how the policy is developed and put into practice. It is contended, however, that Irish educational stakeholders are not naturally endowed with the capacities for such active engagement with the policy process. Drudy and Lynch, for example, stated that Irish educationalists have tended to adopt a consensual view of the social order in their analysis of educational events by representing society in this symbiotically consensus form. They have forestalled the development of a critical structural analysis of the education system. This reappraisal of the extent to which there may be a sufficiently robust policy infrastructure in Ireland to allow for the potential of the benefits of religious traditions, both nationally and in the wider European context, as outlined by Kieran and Clegg above, has prompted the following 3 questions for consideration. Firstly, how can schools and belief traditions best respond to the diverse religious, spiritual, and moral education needs of young people, supporting them toward becoming fully responsible and respectful citizens? Secondly, is it reasonable to expect that in a pluralist environment, the state would allow for the involvement of a variety of education providers in policy development? This raises significant questions in relation to how service providers and the state cooperate, each respecting the proper role and remit of the other, in an increasingly pluralist Ireland where there's a growing emphasis on catering for diversity within the system. And thirdly, OGSA 2000 has raised an important issue for consideration. She contends that it would be helpful to remove policy from its pedestal and make it accessible to a wider community. She is arguing implicitly and explicitly that policy is to be found everywhere in education and not just at the level of central government. And there is virtue in engaging with policy in this way because it contributes to a democratic project in education. How might it be possible to conceive of the interactions between religion, state, and society in the Irish context if policy was removed from its pedestal as outlined by OGSA above? It is anticipated that this project, with its focus on the European dimension, may be helpful for shedding light on some of these considerations for the Irish context, especially in relation to the interactions across religion, education and society.
Thank you, Tim. So we've looked at the history of education and the state or policy in Ireland with Mary, and Tim has given us those great questions looking at the contemporary context of the relationship between education and the state and the European influence when it comes to religion. And I'm just going to look at the European context. And perhaps it's worth remembering that globally religion is on the increase, it's on the rise. And while many people think that the time for religion is waning in Europe, globally 84% of the world's population is currently religious, and religious groups are increasing. And when it comes to Europe, in most European countries, we have long assumed that increased secularization would lead to a gradual retreat of religion from the public space. But that hasn't happened. The tendency has reversed in the course of the last decades, and religion has returned to public discourse. Regardless of the wide variety of conditions prevailing in different European countries, Weiss says that religion appears more and more important to study the increasing influential factor of religion and religiosity and its ambivalent potential for both dialogue and social conflict and tension. So in the last 21 years, religion has come from the periphery into the forefront of European discourse in educational policy and practice. And a whole host of events have led to that more centering of the focus on religion and education in policy in Europe. But a major event, and the catalyst for this, was 9/11. Unfortunately, it took a terrorist act to make governments all over the world, globally, and definitely within Europe, sit up and take note of religion and education and religious education and begin to ask what is happening in schools. And you can see a whole range of events. I've charted them there. Prior to 9/11, religion was largely seen as a private matter, and European governments said it's not really our concern. Post 9/11, just look at the raft of events. The Council of Europe in 2002 focused on the religious dimension of intercultural education. And it saw interreligious education as a potential solution to intercultural problems. 9/11 focused on religion as a force for unrest, for terrorism, for fracture, for bigotry, for hatred, whereas the government started to step in and at EU level, policy started to look at religion as a force for good. In 2003, European education ministers made intercultural education, this was the avenue they were using to access education about religion, and they made intercultural education, including its religious dimension, a priority for the ministers in Europe. In 2005, they had a conference on religion and education in Europe. And the European Commission for Education, Culture and Multilingualism, Jan Figel, spoke of the close relationship between education and religious and moral values and said this was crucial for the future of Europe. So there was a change in thinking when it came to European policy and practice. The Volga Forum Declaration in 2006 called on the Council of Europe to enter into an open, transparent and regular dialogue with religious organisations, and it recognised that this must be underpinned by universal values and principles. So religion then and religious dialogue with religious groups became important for democratic education and democracy in Europe. The Council of Europe in 2006 published a handbook on the religious dimension of intercultural education, and again in 2007 it published, the Council of Europe, that is, Religious Diversity and Intercultural Education, a reference book for schools. And that gave guidelines for every teacher teaching in state schools all over Europe. Again, in 2007, you'll see the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And you might be scratching your head and saying, what is the OSCE doing being interested in religion? Post 9/11, religion became a security issue, and so did the way religion is taught in schools. And the OSCE in 2007 produced the Toledo Guiding Principles on teaching about religions and beliefs in public schools. In 2008, the Council of Europe gave recommendations on the dimension of religious and non-religious convictions within intercultural education. So intercultural education is a main area where the European Union and the Council of Europe locates inter-religious engagement and learning in schools. In 2013, the Director General for Internal Policies produced a document on religious practice and observances in EU member states. In 2016, the Council of Europe produced competencies for democratic culture living together as equals. Now, the danger with this focus on religion is that religion can become securitized. It can simply become a security focus for governments. They're interested in religion and religious education simply because they're afraid if it goes badly wrong, we're going to have terrorist attacks, we're going to have social disruption. So a lot of commentators say that this policy focus is motivated by political and security concerns. But the Council of Europe said, look, there are three principles that we're operating under. Religion is an important cultural fact, similar to other identity sources such as language or history or cultural heritage, and beliefs about the world and values must be developed gradually based on real personal and social learning experiences. So, you know, it's not just focusing on religion in any old way, that the Council of Europe, its policies are focusing on religion to further democratic and intercultural skills. An integrated approach to spiritual, religious, moral and civic values must be encouraged in schools. So it's not just focusing on the teaching of religion in any one curricular area. It's in the visual arts, it's in music, it's in history, it's in languages, right across the curriculum. So there are real opportunities and challenges in Europe because of this focus on religion and education. And I think one of the things that motivated us as a group of researchers with an interest in this area was that in Ireland we tend to focus in quite an insular way on what's happening in Ireland and perhaps to disregard many of the developments in Europe. There have been many conferences, many reports, many publications and much research. So our focus was looking at education, religion and policy in Europe and in Ireland and trying to see if there are synergies and connections and what we might be able to learn. So we have decided that there are opportunities and challenges. So I'll hand over to my colleague Mary to talk about the first one.
So we can appreciate the historical legacy and enlarge current policy perspectives in Ireland in terms of the opportunities and challenges. So we can appreciate where we've come from and develop, I suppose, a new direction as need be. But we shouldn't forget where we've come from, our origins. Patricia, would you like to continue on with the next two as you talk about the policy arena?
Okay, so I think that in Ireland sometimes, and you know, there can be a fractured landscape because religion has represented to many a monopolization or a domination of the educational system, and there is resistance to religious involvement in education. And perhaps by focusing on the European policy perspective and developments, we can begin to realize that religion can also be a force for cohesion, for mutual understanding, for intercultural learning, for dialogue among religious communities. It has an incredible richness and breadth of vision, and that perhaps we can see religion in Ireland in a larger context, moving beyond those binaries that can sometimes be quite unhelpful. And we can see religion as a force for inclusive learning, social cohesion, understanding, and that we can begin to appreciate its role in education and perhaps have a more dispassionate evaluation of its role and contribution in education. And finally, we can draw on the body of European Union expertise, all of the centres. And in Europe in 2010, the European Vagerland Centre was established to continue a link between policy and practice for educators, between the Council of Europe and teachers all over Europe. And that the European Vagerland Centre is situated in Oslo in Norway. And there have been many conferences, there have been many reports, there are many publications, there are many handbooks, there are many resources out there. And we feel that it's a good thing to learn from those, because in Ireland, sometimes if we just focus on the Irish context, we forget about the tremendous wisdom and wealth of experience and expertise that's on our doorstep in Europe. So I think we welcome all of your questions and your comments. Tim, would you like to say anything before we leave?
I think you, both yourself, Patricia, and Mary have captured very succinctly the opportunities and challenges that this project presents and offers, and it has been and is a real trajectory of growth for me to see the extent to which Europe has explored and engaged with and thought about some of the issues that may very well have a place to play in helping us to move forward, to find that intersection between religion, education and society.
Super. Thank you so much. Can we stop recording? And we welcome all of your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.